It is April 2nd, 2024, since we're recording this, and it is snowing, which I think is April Fool's on us. So I always have a little disclaimer at the bottom, but I'm going to actually state it quite clearly for this group and for this recording that I'm presenting based on my own research and data as a subject matter expert on housing, but I do not in any way, shape, or form at all speak for or on behalf of the University of Wisconsin, especially given that we have many people on this call who outrank me at the university, including our friends in FP&M and Brenda Gonzalez at the Office of Community Relations. So this is just my opinions. It doesn't represent anything to do with the city or the county or anybody else I've ever worked for. That just a disclaimer that this is informational only, so don't take this as official. And obviously, I cannot speak or be on behalf of the university or commit any resources of the university. Just want to make that clear. Okay, so Jason said to go about 30 minutes. This is kind of a graduate seminar in housing, so I'm going to talk quickly, and we'll have questions at the end, or I guess we'll have questions at the end. So just very quickly, the interns in the graphics department took the day off, so I put together this poorly functioning template, which is that housing affordability is really a mixture of four things, right? On the demand side, it's households, who are our households, and income. And then on the supply side, it's units and prices. And so oftentimes we get confused because we're conflating the different things, but it's helpful to put those all together. Every presentation I do, people ask questions. So sometimes I include slides that maybe questions you may have asked. I run around giving some version of this talk around the county and the state. And I get a lot of questions that says, why do we need to build a lot of housing? I've heard there's actually a demographic fall off, a cliff, some people are calling it. So this is just the most recent vintage US Census population to give us a sense of our housing market, right? So baby boomers, at one time the largest generation in American housing, living longer, staying in their homes longer. This is a good thing. Poor Gen X, little old me, stuck in the middle. The only reason I've succeeded in life is, of course, I was born in a low cohort birth year, and so relatively I succeed. But the big issue, especially in Madison, is that millennials and Gen Z are the two largest generations in American history. And in some ways, if you see the peak, Gen Z is 22 years old. They all seem to be moving to Madison, competing with millennials and baby boomers for the same housing. So demographics often drives housing demand. I don't see a demographic cliff for another 50 years. So I think we should build a lot of housing nationwide. So we always start by saying who are the demographics in our market. So I just would draw your attention, and these, I'll stop and say, these slides are all going to be available for free. I'm a state employee, so they're public records anyways. I draw your attention to the upper right-hand corner where you look at the rate of change in compound annual growth rates. And the message is this, that our households have been growing faster than housing units and jobs have been growing faster than population. And what that means is a continued squeeze on the housing market. And I'll show you some slides graphically. Pretty strong household income growth in the county, and a high degree of growth of renter household income means that we have what sometimes we call displaced demand. That is, people who would have purchased homes if they could have purchased homes, but they didn't because they can't, and so they stay in the rental market. And so all housing markets are interlinked. And of course, what that means is that if you could build some starter homes to get people out of rental housing, you would reduce some of the demand on our rental markets. Okay, who are we housing? Median household income is about 85,000. So we have about 1/3 of our households who earn less than 50,000. This is the vital component of our workforce, right? This is people who clean offices and shovel the snow and work at UW and work at the hospitals and take care of children and take care of our seniors. There you can see that we generally have a lot of upper income earners as well. We'll return to that theme, that one of the reasons Madison's market is expensive is we have a high growth rate and a high percentage of high income earning households. All right, so if you're thinking that when you went to bed last night, HUD still had the fiscal year 2023 income limits up, you would not be wrong. They released them this morning. So this is fresh, hot, new data just this morning. This gives you a sense of how we think about housing. So all of housing policy, again, many of you know this, but for those who aren't as familiar with the terms, we always think of households adjusted for family size as a percent of the area median income. So there you can see that the median income for a family of 4 is 125,000. And if you want to think about it, a family that makes about half of that, would be a 3-person family, is about $56,000. So again, these seem pretty high to think about affordable housing. And that's largely because we have a very expensive market and a very high income market. And there you can see again what someone can afford to spend in terms of rent. And then this is what we can afford to spend in terms of home ownership. And I won't exegete the numbers too much, but you'll be readily apparent that the middle income family cannot afford the median priced house in Dane County. We have a real affordability challenge up and down the income scale. All right, I always like to put things in context because oftentimes this question comes up: why is housing in Madison so expensive? And this is what you might call one of the stylized facts or iron laws of urban economics, which is that the correlation between income and rent is very high because the income elasticity of the demand for rental housing is about 0.7. So you can have a high income region with high rents, or you can have a low income region with low rents. But unfortunately, you cannot have a high income region with low rents. But Madison is below this trend line because our income rank percentile is higher than our gross rent percentile. So this is a good place to be. And it helps us understand that one of the reasons housing is expensive in Madison is that we have high incomes, right? And obviously housing in Boston is twice as expensive as housing in Madison, and housing in Madison is about twice as expensive as Akron, Ohio. And that's largely driven by job growth and income. So if you want the bumper sticker takeaway, what housing economics is, it's job growth and income. All right, speaking of job growth, the blue line, this is from Woods and Poole, which is the kind of industry standard forecasting company that everybody uses for forecasting and for economic evaluation. The blue line is total employment in the county, and the green line is total households. And if you are staring at the graph and squinting your eyes, you can see that the bars are getting bigger. And what that means is that the average annual growth rate of employment has exceeded the average annual growth rate of households. What does this mean? This means that in Dane County right now, the census tells us there are 100,000 people who live outside of the county and work inside of the county. I'm sorry, 114,000. Those numbers just went up. I'm going to camp out here for a minute because the forecast that everybody uses to plan housing and jobs and transportation comes from Woods and Poole, but there's clearly something unsustainable about this forecast, because this forecast would imply that given our forecasted employment growth, which comes from a macroeconometric forecast and is generally considered accurate, then the number of people who work in the county and live outside of the county is forecasted to grow to well over 200,000, which is unsustainable in terms of housing affordability, and certainly is unsustainable in terms of transportation, because that would mean everybody's driving longer distances. So here's a little joke about urban planning, a joke that is true, right? Transportation policy is housing policy with wheels, right? If you can't build housing close to where people want to live, they live further away and they drive. And so as we talk about our market in Dane County, affordable housing in Dane County means you're living in Beaver Dam or Janesville, and you're driving 45 minutes to an hour. So I also include these slides because there's plenty of skeptics in public who think that we're just kind of making stuff up. But this is the reality, which is, as a region, if we want to continue to grow jobs at the rate we have been growing jobs, then we have to increase the rate of growth of our housing units. Otherwise, we're going to have a real challenge getting workers and having people commute long distances. Okay, so I do this slide around the state. We look at the rate of growth of households, that's people who occupy housing units, and housing units, right? It's kind of a tautology because if you live in a housing unit, you're a household. And Dane County over the last 16 years, sorry, has added about 52,000 housing units. That's good, but we've added 65,000 households, which means approximately every year we underproduce 850 to 900 housing units. Right, this is just another way of saying that we are fast growing in terms of employment, fast growing in terms of households, and fast growing in terms of housing units, but not fast enough to keep up with the job and the population growth. And that's why the long-term trend has been prices up and vacancies down. And if you ask any employer, they have difficulty getting workers because there's no housing. And certainly if you ask people who work with our lower income workers or social workers in the school districts, they will tell you about the effect of housing instability and prices on their clients. So I'm just going to very quickly, the state context. We used to build more than the rest of the country on a per capita basis. Now we build less. That's why you're seeing prices increase everywhere in the state. I'll come back to this idea. Another way to think about our housing challenge is the ratio of housing units to jobs. You want this to be about 1.15. That's what the research tells us. And Dane County is obviously well above that. We have a lot more jobs than we have housing units. Again, this is the squeeze in terms of prices for middle income workers and for lower income renters. All right, now, if you're wondering where the good news slide is, it's way towards the end. That's a joke. It doesn't exist, right? Housing prices went way up everywhere. We'll explain why in just a minute. But in Dane County in particular, in the last 3 years, the median priced home, the one that's the 50th percentile, went up over $112,000 or 38%. So here's where, when I do a talk in public, I say, raise your hand if your income went up $112,000. And it didn't, right? So we're seeing squeezes for affordability for starter homes and for middle class homes, and also for seniors who want to move down, maybe buy a condo, maybe buy something smaller to downsize. Okay, so one of the things driving housing affordability in our region is a macro context, which is that interest rates have gone back up. If you only look at it, if you're used to the cheap money of the 2010s, you think interest rates are skyrocketing. But if you're old enough to remember the 80s, and who doesn't love the 80s for the hair and the music, we're returning to kind of a normal mortgage. My first mortgage was at 7.25%. So, but of course, given that housing is more expensive and interest rates are higher, for your marginal home buyer, millennial at the peak home buying age, or a first-time home buyer, your dollar goes less far to buy something that's more expensive. So that kind of entry-level rung on the housing ladder is out of reach. So one of the reasons we have a rental crisis in Madison is we have a lot of people who could own homes who don't and are in the rental markets. All right, I want to camp out here for a minute. So this takes a little bit explaining, but I think it's the one slide that explains our big challenge. The orange line is single-family building permits per 1,000 population. For those of us who are housing economists, this is kind of the gold standard of housing supply, which is how many units you build per capita, right? We just multiply by 1,000 so that it is on the same scale. The blue line is the median house price relative to the median household income. So what does this mean? You want the ratio of the middle priced home to the middle income family to be about 3.3. HUD says it's 3.36. And what that means is that on average, the middle income family can afford the middle priced home. This is overall affordability in the market. Madison used to be like that. We used to be like that up until about 2002, 2003, right? And during that time, we used to build a lot of housing on a per capita basis. Then comes the recession. Everybody experienced the recession, but we have not recovered anywhere near that. And you can just see that in the data that the ratio between house prices and income has skyrocketed to about 5, right? So there's a connection between housing supply and housing affordability. It's not 100% correlation, but it's pretty close, right? And so one of the things we know is our market is getting more and more expensive. And one of the drivers of that is we've just not built enough housing to keep up with population. Another way to see this is that the ratio for all the other Wisconsin metros has also gotten worse. It's gotten worse everywhere, but of course it's gotten more worse here, right? And we know that something macro is happening when affordability becomes out of reach in Eau Claire and Appleton and Janesville, right? So we are seeing house prices go up everywhere. And now to switch to the rental side. So this is rents as of 3 days ago, so I don't think they've changed a lot. Different national sources will use slightly different methods, so I just average them all together. So the way to think about it is that in Dane County right now, a 1-bedroom is about $1,400 a month, and a 2-bedroom on average is about $1,800 a month. There you can see the price per square foot, which obviously reflects the average of the market. A lot of the Class A build and the new stuff downtown is, I would even say now, probably way above $3 a square foot. Okay, so let's look at rent growth versus apartment vacancy rate. This is a busy table. And as we like to say, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then a good data table is worth 1,000 pictures. And basically what this means is when apartment vacancy rates get low, in the next 6 to 9 months, rent growth accelerates. But when vacancy rates get above 5%, which is the healthy market, then you see rents fall. And if you trace this graph over time, you'll see it's a repeated pattern. Vacancies go up, rent growth slows down or goes negative. Vacancies go down, meaning more people are coming, and then rent growth accelerates. If you do a regression trend line over the last 6 years, you will see rents have gone up because vacancy rates have gone down. What does this mean? We're building lots and lots and lots of rental units, and it's still slightly inadequate to keep up with rental demand. Okay, so another way to think about our rental and housing market is what we call the big squeeze. If you look, the blue graph is the renters who are in our county based on their percent of median income, and the green is HUD's estimate of the rental units available. So we have a shortage of units at the low end, and we have a shortage of units at the high end. We call this the big squeeze because it means everybody's chasing the same units in the middle of the market. Okay. And then if we're also talking about our market, we always have to emphasize the fact that housing burdens, housing availability, housing affordability is not distributed equally, right? There's been some discussion online, which I will be careful about, people saying, do we really have a housing crisis? And let's be honest, for upper middle income households like me, who are older and whiter, and we've owned our home for 20 plus years, there's no housing crisis. We've seen our house value go way up. I refinanced my mortgage at less than 3%. So what housing crisis? Well, when you have a market that is severely squeezed like ours, the burden falls disproportionately on the lower income renters and owners. And so this is replicating what HUD would do for what's called the worst case housing needs report. And these are families that make 50% or less of the median income and pay more than 50% of their household income on housing. So these are severely cost burdened, very low income households. There you see that over time, our numbers have gone up. for renter households. And you know, this doesn't include what I normally include, which I strip out students, try to estimate the percent of very low income renters that are students, because right, they might be low income for a different reason, but I included them for this purpose since we're talking about student affordable housing. But we have a severe housing shortage, and that is seen in terms of prices increasing. And when prices increase in a squeezed market, they increase the most on the low end of the market, and that squeezes our low income renters. So this, of course, is only the people who've stayed in Dane County and pay more than 50% of their income in rent. What this data does not include is the people who have been squeezed out of the county and have to drive long distances, or households that are ultimately squeezed into being doubled up, or in the most extreme case, experiencing homelessness. Eviction filings in Dane County were suppressed during the pandemic because of the eviction moratorium, but we have reacquired the high rate of eviction filings, and in fact surpassing the pre-pandemic levels in our county. Of course, we want to say that the distribution of housing burdens and housing problems is not equal or fair across different racial categories, given the long history of racial segregation and discrimination nationwide and in Dane County. It is no surprise that you have significant differences in housing, right? And as I like to explain to my students, there's two sources of disparity for housing outcomes by race. One, of course, is, as you see on this slide, a disparity in income, right? There's because housing is largely driven by the income you earn, racial disparities in income translate into racial disparities in housing. But if we look at home ownership rates in Dane County, then we have a real problem, a real challenge, right? So it's important to understand that the Black home ownership rate nationwide is about 48%. So today that's no better than it was in 1968 when we passed the Fair Housing Act. That is shameful and abysmal. In Wisconsin, it's 25%, more shameful, more abysmal. And in Dane County, it's 13.6%. So there you see, even amongst households that earn more than the median income in Dane County, the white home ownership rate is about 82%, and the Black home ownership rate is 49%, right? So we have a very expensive market, we have a squeezed market, and the benefits and burdens of our housing market are not distributed equally. Just a few more depressing slides. In the medium term, one of the solutions, a part of the solution, is to build more housing to respond to demand, right? The other part, of course, is to build more affordable housing and to increase subsidies for things like vouchers. But it's very hard to build anything right now because banks are tightening the lending standards. And even if you can get a loan, as any of the developers on the call will tell you, you're going to get money at like 8.5% to 9% loan. So banks are tightening the lending standards, and it's just very expensive to build anything. So the cost of construction has gone up about 38% on single family and multifamily since pre-pandemic. I want to talk about this for a minute, right? Ultimately, in an adequately supplied capital market, the cost of a unit of capital, like a house or an apartment, should converge to the replacement cost, right? Or think about it this way, when the cost to build something new goes way up, then the cost of the existing stuff also goes up, right? The closest substitute to a new car is a used car. Closest substitute to a new apartment is a used apartment or an existing apartment. So it's no surprise that rents and home prices have gone up 35+% because the replacement cost, the cost to build anything new, has also gone up 35%. This is much more of a macro issue that we can't do much about here. But I can tell you, if we as a society and a country can't bring these prices down for construction, we're going to continue to see what we see now, which is that housing is out of reach and expensive. Even if I waved my magic wand and we started building a lot of housing in this state to make up for the shortage, we don't have enough workers. We have fewer people employed building buildings than we did in 2005, right? So since many of you are in the economic development and workforce development business, we not just have to only get sites ready to build on the planning and development side, we need job training and workforce retention and recruitment in the construction and the allied trades. All right, so I use public data, so I don't have to use anything by CoStar. If you want a rule of thumb to build a new unit of multifamily housing in Dane County, total average development cost is about $380,000, right? So sometimes people say, why is the rent on new supply expensive? It's expensive to build, right? And this is true whether the cost is for a market rate unit or for a low income affordable housing tax credit. One of the reasons housing is expensive is operating costs have gone up, taxes have gone up, maintenance costs have gone up, utility costs have gone up, and the cost of debt has also gone up. So I just always include this slide to help anchor our discussions when people think that there's a lot of wiggle room either on the capital expenditure or on the profit side to bring rents down. And really the only wiggle room is on the mortgage and the debt side. And that's how the tax credit program largely works. And that is a lot of information in a very short time.